Magandang araw, Podmates! May isa na naman tayong mainit na usapan tungkol sa bayan at isang problema na global na ang sakop. Ang disinformation o sa ibang panahon mas kilala bilang fake news. Ang kausap ko ngayon ay isang batikang profesor at researcher sa Amerika pero Filipino siya na katrabaho ko dati sa GMA Network. Ngayon, isa na siyang leading expert sa larangan ng mga makabagong media, online platforms at paano ito ginagamit para sa propaganda. Hindi na raw sapat ang salitang disinformation. Influence operations na ang bansag sa research field niya. Dr. Jonathan Ong is a professor and disinformation researcher at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst and at Harvard University. Magandang araw sa iyo, Jonathan.
Nice to be here. Nice to connect with you, Howie. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for joining us, Jonathan. Yeah, John, I mentioned that you were at GMA Network for a while. I met you when you were my colleague there, but you were on the corporate side of the network. I suppose that was one of your first jobs out of college.
Yes.
But now you've made a name for yourself, in the field of communications research and media studies. How much did your real-world experience in media in the Philippines influence your career decisions and your research interests?
Yeah, for sure. My GMA was my second job, Howie. And if you remember, my first project was election 2004. So it was doing the branding and communications to promote some of the election coverage and the election specials of GMA. And that was my second job. My first job was in advertising for McCann Erickson. And so I think and all of those experience definitely shaped my own analysis, how I understand the power of media, legacy media, mainstream media, and the news in the Philippines. I remember also doing a lot of work with GMA Regional na pumupunta tayo sa Iloilo, sa Cebu.
That's right.
Meron tayong mga barangay road shows and kitang-kita mo that, 'di ba, at the local level for communities, news is so important for them, entertainment is so important to them. They look up to you, journalists and celebrities. Diba? They look up to you but also treat you as friends, and so I think that definitely shaped all my experiences. But I was also privy to some of the for-profit motives of media corporations, and that critique is very much present then dun sa aking pananaliksik.
Well, had you always wanted to do this kind of research and enter this research field, and then you decided to work first in advertising and then a so-called legacy media, one of the biggest TV stations in the Philippines? They seem to be like almost ideal preparation for going into the kind of research that you're in right now, no? Or sila ang nag-udyok sa iyo na magandang gawing career ito pag sa academe, no?
Yeah. So I was very nerdy even in Ateneo. I took a BA in communication in Ateneo. So I knew na medyo academically inclined na ako noon pa lang. So a huge fan of film and different kinds of productions, but definitely parang immersing myself in GMA and how tangible television is to ordinary people. Parang dun ako namulat na ang experience natin ng media, ng television, kakaiba in other countries. I think about the example palagi of Kapuso Foundation and yung equivalent niya of Bantay Bata, na yung media sa atin hindi lang siya entertainment, hindi lang siya news. There's a real concrete element of charity, of public service, of intervention, and at the local level, it has huge implications. So parte yun nung aking PhD when I did my PhD in sociology, to talk about how the unique features ng ating media 'di ba parang on one hand meron tayong mga game shows that are skewing toward low income people. At the same time, we also offer these kinds of public service opportunities through charities, and the close connection with news and charity operations, I think, is quite unique to the Philippines. But we can see some versions of it in Latin American TV as well. Yun yung aking, those were my findings for my PhD back in the day.
Well, I'm eager to ask you about your current work, no. But before we leave your origin story, you covered or you were part of the network, GMA Network's preparations for its election coverage in 2004. Tama, 2004.
Yes.
So, take us back to that time. I suppose you've been thinking about that because you're a professional researcher now. Back then, of course, wala pa tong lahat ng tong nire-research mo ngayon, no? Itong
For
mga
sure.
on, YouTube and all of that, no? But 2004, it was the early days of the digital age, no? What were the factors back then in 2004 for influencing people's voting decisions? And were you
That's a great question.
were you already bothered by what you were observing back then?
Yeah, great question, Howie. And thank you for giving me like a wide space to play with that question. Naalala ko during that time how we talk about Philippine news institutions and Philippine media institutions as the most trusted institutions in Filipino society. We were so proud of how 24 Oras, obviously yung equivalent niya, TV Patrol sa ABS-CBN, parang these were our daily rituals, part of our daily rituals. We watch these shows, they get very good ratings. We have a common sense of these are the important issues of the day. We have that shared sense of, okay, ito yung importanteng pagtuunan natin ng ating attention. At the same time, our entertainment programming also were ways in which Filipino citizens in a way come together and have, shared jokes, shared experiences. So think about that sense of, having community rituals around television na in 2022 kakaiba na, 'di ba? Na parang I look at, for example, Twitter. That's how I also consume my news nowadays. My Twitter is still connected to a Philippine Twitter trending topics. And nagugulat na lang ako paminsan na sino ba 'tong mga nag-aaway na blogger na ito? Sino ba itong mga celebrity na pinag-uusapan ngayon? Parang you can have a sense na kakaiba na yung mga mundo na ginagalawa ng bawat citizen. And I think obviously with surveys that have also emerged over the past year, yung trust ng mainstream media, trust ng ordinary tao sa mainstream media, bumaba na din. And so I think that is how, in a way, I kind of like segue into our argument na may konsepto kami ng parallel public sphere na for us, it's quite distinct and quite momentous to talk about that in the Philippines in 2022 dahil hindi naman ganito ang ating media and information landscape. Even in the past, 5 years, we wouldn't be using the term parallel public sphere. The idea na nagkaroon na ng split na dalawang information and media ecosystem na iba yung framing ng mga topics, iba yung mga celebrity, iba yung mga influencer, iba yung mga news pundits, and hindi na nag-uusap itong dalawang public sphere na ito. Kaya siya parallel, di ba? These are two parallel lines that do not converge, do not align.
Okay, just reading your work in the last several years, no? I mean, sometimes you get a sense of how the internet and by extension almost the entire information ecosystem has become kind of dystopian, no? So I mean, parang it's become in a way parang a hellish place, no, a toxic place, no. But I want to rewind a little bit again, no. But after 2004, kasi the early days, or I would say I don't know if this is the early days, no, but maybe the adolescent days of social media. Nagkaroon ng Arab Spring, and people were talking about the promise of social media, this new space, the democratizing power. At the same time, few people were expressing regrets about the dissipation of big media, corporate media power, no? Kasi sabi mo nga nagkaroon ng less trust, and of course people like me who work at large networks, were a bit dismayed by this decline of trust. But people are saying, well, we have social media and it's democratizing people. It's democratizing societies, and it's a hope for democracy in authoritarian countries, etc. No, you were already researching media during this time, no? But when did you? And I'm sure you were observing a lot of these things. When did you start becoming worried that there would be this kind of direction for, and maybe this age of promise, no, the Arab Spring, it was a global spring actually for social media, no, was not going to last long, no?
I did not intend to, study online trolls. I agree with you, Howie, that there's a way of looking at and experiencing social media nowadays. It's so toxic. Wala nang nag-uusap. And parang the idea na you discover like new research or new ideas, new concepts, or even films, diba? Via like reading reviews on social media. Parang that discovery aspect of social media, which was there, early 2000s, early 2010s. Parang ngayon, it's just toxic conversations, whether it be about US politics, which of course I also follow as an academic based here, but also Philippine politics, and the idea na we unfriend each other now, di ba? Parang kakaiba din yun. Thinking of how, so maybe one way to answer your question is by sharing insights of, early studies that I did about social media. One was around Typhoon Haiyan. And a lot of the discourse then was, digital media for humanitarianism.
Okay, so excuse me, I'm trying to remember how long ago that was. That's Yolanda, no? In the Philippines. 20...
Typhoon Yolanda, 2015? 2014? Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Sige. Okay.
I think
less than 10 years ago.
Yeah. And so yung discussions then was how can we use social media for fundraising, for helping communities who are recovering from disaster. So the idea of social media for social good, ito yung mga usap-usapan sa social media dati. So we embraced a lot of social media for their promise of solidarity, for humanitarianism, for charity. Again, I go back to also some of my earlier interests in, Bantay Bata and Kapuso Foundation, and how I found all of those unique. Another aspect of Filipino social media was the story of migrant families and how Filipinos are quick to embrace social media because of the nature of Filipino families as always being transnational. Lahat tayo may relative sa ibang bansa or perhaps have a migration history ourselves. And so kung dati we keep in touch with family through texting or through phone calls, social media is a way for us to keep in touch with with family members who are distant from us. And so I remember working with a mentor. His name is Professor Danny Miller. He visited the Philippines. I was working as his research assistant, and yung project ni Danny was also Mir Kamadiano. It's important for me to also not forget. My role was to they interviewed Filipinas in the UK, mga Filipina nurses in the UK. Tapos in-interview nila, how do they use social media? How do you keep in touch with your kids back home? How do you arrange mga remittances, through Facebook or texting, etc. And then, bumisita silang Pilipinas, and I was still a grad student then. And hinanap ko yung mga anak ng mga nurses na na-interview nila. And so we were trying to compare, ano yung sinabi ng mommy, anong sinabi naman ng anak, parang, and how do they also embrace social media or perhaps resent social media. And so the idea that Filipinos are quick to embrace digital innovations because we do need tools for connectivity, tools for intimacy and family connection. I think that's a real part of our story.
Yeah, well, we're not saying naman na nawala na lahat yon, no? Because I think all of us here right now in this room are still doing Facebook and the older social media platforms, and it's still possible to discover new films and find out new things about our passions, our interests, no. Pero yun na nga, no, nahaluan na ng maraming toxicity, no.
Yeah,
and
imagine. I'm just thinking, just to follow on with that, just to think about how those same transnational families in the context of this election cycle, I would be curious, diba, kung na-experience din ba, and of course based on observations of ourselves as researchers, but also our other colleagues and also lay observations, na ang daming mga nag-unfriend, nag-unfollow based on how people voted and based on, diba, si tita abroad na nag-vote for Trump or nag-vote for Biden pero nag-vote sila for Marcos and all of those things as well.
Yeah. Well, you made an impact back in 2018 with a groundbreaking study, called the Architects of Disinformation, where you interviewed people in the PR and advertising industries who are paid to spread disinformation or fake news, in the service of people in power, mostly, the so-called trolls, no. I was at the conference where you launched this report, and essentially you blew the lid off this whole troll universe, which was kind of shrouded in a lot of mystery, a toxic mystery. But you presented the real people doing troll operations, no? So that was what a lot of people recall. But you just published another report, that has broken ground, new ground last October at a Harvard conference. And you published, or no, you presented Parallel Public Spheres, influence operations. So you don't call it disinformation anymore, and in your introduction to the report, sabi mo, it's no longer enough, no? It's no longer, it doesn't capture what's going on anymore. So that's why you chose to call it influence operations, no? Yung nagaganap ngayon sa internet, in the service of winning elections, ngayon people in the service of people in power or people opposing those in power, etc. No, but why influence operations? Why have you evolved from the word disinformation? It's hardly mentioned in this new report.
So I think we were looking for a term that has a wider remit, that has it's like a bigger umbrella concept that is able to capture a more diverse range of strategic communication practices that are not all illegal, but are quite shady and unethical, and that we need to be talking more about. And at the same time, it's a way to like how disinformation and its specific assumptions and our own interpretations of Philippines. Now, it's taken on quite a baggage, and so it calls to mind the idea of fact checking of false claims peddled by online trolls. And therefore, yung parang association natin with the term disinformation is that parang naghahunting tayo ng trolls. Naghahunting tayo ng anonymous accounts on Twitter, mga fake accounts sa Facebook. Naghahanap tayo ng mga low-level mga bloggers na nagpe-peddle sila ng outright lies. Ang sabi namin, yes, meron pa rin ng mga ganitong pamamaraan na pag-impluwensya for politics, for elections. But at the same time, we need to have a bigger frame that also talks about other kinds of unfair campaign tactics, the use of falsehoods mixed with truth, also mobilizing influencers in a way na does not actually get captured by campaign finance regulation. I think kailangan din natin yung pag-usapan. And then, and we give a lot of examples ng mga influence operations na hindi naman always about falsehoods, na obvious falsehoods, but iba-iba yung mga strategy nila. And that's what we lay out in this new report called Parallel Public Spheres.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kasi pag sinabing disinformation, ang isang definition yan is falsehood nga, mga sinungaling, no, na kinakalat deliberately, as opposed to misinformation, yung parang factual error na binabawi, nag-apologize yung nagkamali, etc. Yung disinformation, yung talagang alam ng nagkakalat na mali, it is often malicious and falsehood, no. So you have moved on to a wider sphere nga, yung influence operations, no. Well, nakinig ako sa yung podcast mo, no. With congratulations on that, no, kasi
Thank you.
it's kind of been a sleeper hit, no.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I like that term, sleeper hit.
Yeah. Well, kasi you wondered at one point you were wondering how people involved in influence operations slept at night, no. I think you said this at Harvard, no. But listening to the people you spoke to on your podcast, they seemed quite comfortable with what they were doing. And parang yun nga, no, it's like why, yung attitude nila, why should we lose any sleep about this? We're not lying, no. They just felt that they were helping in an advocacy, no, a campaign advocacy. And you made it a point to include itong so-called trolls or influencers, kasi most of them were, I think the ones you interviewed were they hid behind aliases, no, and you even disguised their voices, no. They were kakamping, no, or they were serving the Leni Robredo campaign, kasi may malaking assumption na karamihan itong mga online operations, itong mga trolls, disinformation, was in the service of the Marcos campaign, no? And then there's even a academic study that seems to point towards that, no?
Yes.
So itong mga in-interview mo, what was shady exactly about what they were doing? Kasi kung di naman sila necessarily nagsisinungaling, no, they weren't spreading crazy conspiracy theories, etc., no. When you interviewed them, they were very rational, no. But so what was shady about them? What was wrong?
Great question. So and you also bring in my podcast. So for Howie Severino Podcast listeners, my podcast is entitled Catch Me If You Can. And there we actually interview at least one operator, one influence operator each week. Some of them we hide behind pseudonyms, and we tweak their voice a little bit. So, yung mga nagpa-interview most recently for our season 2 are mga kakamping operators and influencers online. And hindi naman sila, actually, for them, I won't classify them as quote-unquote trolls in the sense na they peddle hateful messaging or misinformation or anything misleading, but they're actually fighting the trolls. Yun naman yung position nila, and what they're trying to do. At least the last few episodes, we interviewed Super Negatrona, who's a big kakamping influencer with, I think, 50,000 followers. So, ang strategy naman nila is fighting fire with fire. And I think that's one of the themes that we also discuss in our report, na how are quote unquote liberals also organizing and trying to fight back. Could it be fighting fire with fire? Some of the actual tactics are kind of trolly, Howie, in the sense na they will also organize and mobilize over text na parang, hey, sabay-sabay nating i-report itong mga account na ito. So for listeners out there, this is the idea of the mass report hour. For Facebook,
you call that, you had a term for that, no? Brigading? Is that,
yes.
Tama ba yun?
Yeah.
Brigading.
Yeah.
No? Parang brigade.
Brigading. And for Facebook, they actually classify that as inauthentic coordinated behavior. They're not happy about that. And then, so yun, one example, we discuss that in our report, brigading, its opportunities, but also its risks. Another one naman is cancel culture. Diba? I think usap-usapan natin the past couple of months, should we be withdrawing support from businesses, from celebrities who are actually supporting people behind historical distortions or peddling them themselves, legitimizing fantasy narratives around martial law. And so what are the opportunities that cancel culture can provide, but what are also its potential backlash effects? Pinag-usapan din namin ito sa report. Pero yung mga specific discussions of yung mga more worrying kinds of historical distortions and attacks on mainstream media and attacks on researchers, we also include that in the report na ginagawa naman ito mostly nung pro-Marcos media universe, 'di ba? Na meron silang influencers, pero hindi lang influencers, yung mga experts na may mga PhD na din sila na nagpe-peddle ng kanya-kanyang justification, kanya-kanyang explanation to justify Marcos policies. We also discuss, historical distortion of Marcos na, of course, it's about a way of talking about martial law as the golden age, pero may performance quality din ito. So we talk about it as a victimhood performance na, yung Marcos family, victim sila. Victim sila ng history, pero victim din sila ng mainstream media. So, may ganong kind of performance na for us, hindi ito quote-unquote disinformation. Parang it's a bigger ritual. It's a communicative performance na look at us, we're victims. And so one needs to think about it as a narrative more than just a falsehood, right?
How would you define troll now? Kasi in one of your podcasts, you said that no one you interviewed admitted to being a troll. They don't consider themselves a troll. It's not part of their self-identification. And then you just mentioned trolly behavior. So let's get our definitions straight here. No, so is there an updated definition on this? And if you recall, none of the candidates admitted employing trolls, and Marcus Jr. himself explicitly said, I have never hired any trolls. So parang, being a troll is considered a really bad thing, no? So, but you seem to be convinced they exist. So, ano bang troll in your context?
Yeah, great question around definitions. So there's the dictionary definition of a troll, which is an online user who is very provocative. So in a way, provocateur siya, di ba? Parang through jokes, through snarky, sometimes like double meaning kind of humor and postings. They're meant to evoke a reaction, usually from more quote unquote mainstream or from parang vote against like mainstream assumptions, so they are contrarians kumbaga. So yun yung traditional definition ng troll. Sa Pilipinas merong mas specific connotations na siya, na nagkaroon na siya ng specific associations na and that's what I try to push against actually. And you're right, Howie, that in our report, we actually try to use troll as an adjective, but never to call someone a troll. Because parang, and to me, that's a thoughtfulness around, I really try to push against itong assumption natin na the troll is typically from low-income classes. They are bobotante, they are uneducated, hindi nakatapos ng high school, therefore na-brainwash sila ng Marcoses or ng Duterte, and therefore are invading our online spaces and misbehaving in online spaces.
But
and
not
to me,
necessarily paid.
I'm not.
Hindi to mga bayaran. I mean, they're not paid to do this. Parang organic ito. They're just, they belong to a certain class of people. Kasi akala ko all this time, ang pag sinabing troll, and troll farm, these are people who probably know better, but they're paid to say these things, post these things, and spread hate and vitriol and all of that. So bayaran sila. But you're saying you don't have to be paid to fit this definition of a troll in the Philippine
context. You don't
context.
have to be. Especially the U.S. definitions of trolls are actually de-emphasize the paid aspect. Sa Pilipinas mas may association ang word troll na sa bayaran, 'di ba? And to me, what I'm trying to push against with yung also the idea of troll hunting and disinformation literacy campaigns, parang nagiging siyang troll hunting or bot busting. For me, it's a waste of energy, to be honest, and it's a way also of it's also a moral displacement na hinahunting natin yung mga low level accounts. Parang we are we spend a lot of energies looking for these accounts on Twitter, pero for me it's important to have a sense of who's actually running the show, who's controlling all of these accounts, who has who received the big budget to organize all of these influencers to coordinate on a specific message. And so the advocacy that I have tried to emphasize in Catch Me If You Can and also in this report is, sino ba talaga yung top troll? Sino ba talaga yung chief architect of disinformation? Sino ba talaga yung chief strategist who's running the show? And as the earlier study that I released in 2018, and you were there for the launch, Howie, parang sinasabi namin doon na actually parang ang dami nating energy focus on it. Sino ba itong anonymous trolls, when in reality open secret naman kung sino talaga yung mga namamalakad ng campaign within the PR industries. So I think that's that's my intervention around it. So I hope
so yung concept ng troll farm, legitimate ba yan? I mean, is it a valid concept? Kasi yung troll farm, because there are or are there people, like armies of people, small armies of people who are employed, they're paid to post certain things and attack certain people? May mga ganun talaga.
Yeah. So that's a good question. So from my own personal experience, I've been doing this research for over 5 years now. I have never been physically in a troll farm that looks like a call center. Never. So parang the idea, 'di ba, na parang these are like rows and rows of computer, or parang mga and parang it's a kind of like rote and repetitive kind of copy paste work, na parang these are, low level employees. Actually, parang the quote unquote troll farms that I have been privy to and seen and also heard from, like in our interviews in Catch Me If You Can, they're in a way temporary arrangements. So parang I will be doing a black operations campaign for a politician for 3 months, pero I'm gonna be doing it from my own home computer. For some of them, they do it out of public relations firms, in boutique PR firms in Makati. So hindi siya shady. At the same time, parang we had one episode in Catch Me If You Can. Episode 1 naman na PR firm yung kanyang employer. Akala niya mag-work siya dun sa opisina nila sa Quezon City, pero dinala sila sa parang headquarters next to the mayor's office, because yun pala yung magiging niyang kliyente. So iba't iba yung look ng troll farm, and most of the time hindi siya call center style. Actually, very flexible work arrangement siya. Gig siya for 3 months or 6 months at a time. Renewable yung contract. Hindi siya yung parang daily, parang yung title nila is not a troll, di ba? Parang no one is employed as a full-time troll. Parang palaging part-time lang ito, gig lang ito, added income ko lang ito. And that's what we revealed in Catch Me If You Can. And you can hear from them directly.
Yeah, oo. Well, that's interesting nga eh. So halimbawa itong some of the more recent ones, no? They were quite open about what they were doing. They were leading teams. They were working from home. They were approached by middleman, etc.
Yeah.
I mean, would you call that person a troll or just another influence operator?
Yeah, so I prefer the term influence operator, just in the sense na what they're actually doing is quite diverse and creative as well. Again, the idea of the troll is shit posters lang sila, parang they just, 'di ba, parang they're just very crass, or parang nagmumura lang sila online, parang walang strategy. But actually these people are very smart. They are very creative. They use a lot of jokes and inside humor. They use montage. One of the episodes we talked to a meme factory operator, and ang galing ng mga memes niya na nagva-viral talaga dahil funny naman talaga. Parang they use music and music overlay over Sara Duterte's own voice, 'di ba, to comment and parody her, pero hindi naman siya outright disinformation. So I prefer to use the term influence operations. Pero for me, those still raise a lot of important questions about ethics and regulation. So the fact in that particular case, this person was doing a set of memes attacking Marcos and Sara Duterte, pero nagre-report siya sa intermediary, never to any specific politician or political party. A lot of money was invested in this group of meme operators, but were all of their works, officially reported as part of campaign expenses? that's an open question that I think is important to discuss in terms of we want campaigns to be fair. We want campaigns to follow a set of regulations. So that I think is an important set of questions in terms of fairness, diba?
Yeah. Well, the implication in that
yeah.
interview, John, was that particular operation was not even officially connected, and maybe the campaign team of Lenny Robredo didn't even know about it. Didn't even
Didn't
know
even
that.
know about it.
Oo,
Yeah.
yun ang sinasabi
I
ko.
spoke to Ma'am Lenny as well. Sabi ko, Ma'am, I'm sure hindi niyo naman kilala to. Tapos of course, hindi naman.
And so it's very hard for them to control that, and it would
it's
be hard to regulate it, in fact.
Yeah, and buti na lang the meme operator we discussed, at least based on his disclosures, there's nothing disinformative in terms of what they actually produced. But I don't think other outfits would have that sense of, would maintain those ethical standards, don't you think? We also have examples, Howie, from 2019 naman, na it was actually a foreign business person who was funding a group of influence operators to help elect a city mayor. So again, this outfit, this group of meme operators were doing it to promote a local mayor, pero ang nagpondo sa kanila is a foreigner. So
which is a violation of campaign law, no?
And it's foreign interference. Yes, absolutely,
Yes.
Howie. So I think parang to me, those are ethical questions na hindi natin usually na pag-uusapan kung ang pag-uusapan natin palaging false ba ito or true. And those were some of the examples that we wanted to also bring in na, kailangan natin to pag-usapan in our public sphere, but also sa industriya ng political consultancies.
Yeah, well, I'm curious though. What should be the parameters now be for election campaign communication strategies? No, kasi halimbawa yung that first definition you mentioned for troll, no, sa the dictionary definition doesn't sound negative at all. Yung being a provocateur, being a contrarian. Jose Rizal then was a troll, di ba? Back then, and he was even called a propagandist, di ba? So didn't really have such a negative connotation back then, no? And one thing you pointed out in one of your podcasts was that the candidates themselves, the presidential and vice presidential candidates, in general, their campaign rhetoric was positive, no? They weren't attacking. They were not being real live trolls, di ba? As opposed to maybe previous campaigns, which were maybe more negative, and especially political campaigns there in the United States, di ba? And in other Western countries, napaka negative. You know, we all of us heard Donald Trump for years, no? How he talked about his opponents, etc. No, so I just found it interesting that you mentioned that dito, the rhetoric was generally positive, no? I mean, unity, diba? Radical love. I mean, it was so warm and fuzzy, no? Yung mga campaign themes, no? As opposed to if you contrast that with the Duterte campaign, who, during the campaign, he was already threatening to kill people and, people should die and all of that, no? There was a lot of misogyny and the languages. At the same time, there was a lot of online campaign activity, maybe not connected with the campaigns themselves officially, which were quite negative, no? So, I'd like to ask you, so because if you consider that negative campaigning has always been part of politics in liberal democracies and in most democracies, no? The online, the dark tactics online for these campaigns enable the candidates themselves to rise above the toxicity and kind of project this image of being I'm above all of that. I want to be I want to be more virtuous than than what you're seeing online, 'di ba? But in reality, all of these campaigns were employing or had supporters who were spreading toxicity online.
Yeah, parang you're so right, Howie. Thanks for putting it in your own words and explaining it so thoughtfully. Parang may distribution of labor, 'di ba? Na parang yung mga attack dogs mo, sila yung mga online influencers. You can have you can run a super dirty campaign online but try to present yourself as respectable in mainstream spaces. And I think that is enabled by social media architectures. That is enabled by a lot of gray areas that we have around political campaigns. I think one of the examples we mentioned in the report that for us raises a lot of questions around ethics, and what precedent it might set as well was the example of in our infographic we call her Senator Satirist, and I think kilala naman natin kung sino ito. The sister of Bongbong Marcos, Amy Marcos, produced a series of skits on YouTube satirizing and poking fun at Bongbong Marcos's rival Leni Robredo through professionally produced skits. So umaacting si Madam Senator, meron siyang professional set of actors, parang ang conversation nila parang marites, they're trying to catch up on each other and kung ano yung gossip for the day, and usually every line that they deliver is a coded attack against the Dilawans or the Pinks or VP Robredo, diba? So anong example ito na sineset? So the fact na hindi ito kayang ma-fact check. Unang-una, satire ito, so they can always say na these are just jokes. And that's how she justified it herself in interviews with mainstream media reporters na pina-explain sa kanya. Sabi naman niya na, oy, yung mga mapikon, sila yung matatalo dito. Parang joke time lang ito, sabi ni Senator Marcos, diba? But at the same time, what does that also mean about social media content policy? So for YouTube, how can they penalize a sitting incumbent senator, right? I don't think, so I think that affords her a level of protection because it's housed under her official page. Right? So this isn't like trolling by an anonymous account na kayang ma-deplatform ng YouTube. Official page ito ng incumbent senator. So to us it's really puzzling, and for us it was a real campaign innovation. We haven't seen, parang sanay naman tayo sa Pilipinas na actors nagigisilang politician, pero ito politician siya pero meron siyang acting skits.
Okay, well, it's puzzling, and at the same time, it's a campaign innovation, sabi mo nga. But I'm wondering why she even did it. Kasi wasn't there also a risk on her part? Sabi mo nga, she is a senator, which we like to think there's a certain dignity in our senators, and it made her also a target. Diba? I mean, she could have, their campaign could have easily employed professional actresses, to play that part. After all, I don't think she was portraying her real self there. And the second question there is, was it effective? I mean, are we going to see more of that kind of campaign tactic na, hard to regulate and all of that using the Senate website, etc. Was it effective enough for others to try that strategy na the so-called coded attacks na parang wala naman masyadong code, di ba? I mean, it was also obvious.
It was very obvious.
Yeah, it could have actually backfired. I don't know. I don't know the outcome of that strategy. If anyone's actually done a study on the effects, the results of that in terms of the campaign.
So the metaphor that we use also in the report, to describe the emergence of itong parallel public spheres, di ba? Na parang kung meron tayong GMA, ABS-CBN as our source of news, we have also, our celebrities that we look up to, who use, their celebrity to shed light on activist causes and advocacies. Meron na din yung kabila. And for us, kumbaga parang Marvel Universe world building. Kailangan may iba-iba kang content, may iba-iba kang genre to appeal to different demographics. So for me, Howie, it is effective in the sense na they're populating the Marcos multiverse, universe, kumbaga na meron silang comedy, meron silang blockbuster movie, meron silang PhD na pandit, meron silang debates, kumbaga content diversity and content diversification. Mabobore din yung kanilang mga fans kung pare-pareho lang yung kinds of contents and genre na ko-consume nila, 'di ba? That are being pumped to them. So for me, for Aimee to be showcasing a different aspect of herself na kaya naman pala niya umacting, the fact that her channel is also her flexing, her ability to do mga day in the life vlogs, tour of Malacanang, tour of Chinatown, kasama niya si Borgie Manotok, 'di ba, who's very attractive. Parang they're allowing multiple points of identification for fans. Na parang ay relatable naman pala si Madam. Ay nakakatawa naman pala siya. Ay gwapo naman ng pamilya niya. 'Di ba? So parang there's multiple ways in which you can connect with their story. And it's always kind of dropped, it's very savvy for us as someone who has watched a lot of these videos for research purposes. So I've spent hours watching Aimee's YouTube channel. So in the middle of a 20-minute tour of Binondo and may food tasting sila, parang may reference then to this is where my father used to eat. This is where, 'di ba? Parang may mga ganun din connection to the past and also subtle digs to their enemies at the present. And it's done very subtly. And to me, I think it's very effective actually.
Okay, well, speaking of effective propaganda, I mean, let's call it that, no? It's effective propaganda, no? I just want to give it some historical context. No, nabagin ko si Rizal kanina. He was part of this propaganda movement, so-called propaganda movement, no, which is celebrated in history. No, when you say propaganda movement, you don't give it the connotation of propaganda today, which is, I guess, you identify it with authoritarians, disinformation and all that. But in panahon ni Rizal and the other ilustrados, no, they were using propaganda for a noble cause, no, and as you mentioned, you explore different genres, and the genre that Rizal explored was novel writing, diba? Which his novels were not intended to entertain, not just to entertain, but they were meant to caricature certain kinds of personalities, expose abuse, injustice, and all that. In particular, no, friars, no, si Padre Damaso, of course, is a famous case, no. But okay, looking at it through your contemporary academic lens, and saying some kinds of propaganda and techniques are shady, would you consider those novels shady? Would they have crossed the line, caricaturing Damaso? After all, the authorities found them very scandalous, libelous, and worthy of the death penalty, no? But of course, now of course, national hero natin yan. We don't want to say too many bad things about him. But have our standards shifted in a way? So what's so different about what Aimee did from what Rizal did, aside from magkaiba lang yung genre nila?
Well, I think Rizal was offering anti-colonial critique, and so there's a so using satire and parody. I celebrate these as weapons of the week, and that's a concept by an anthropologist, James Scott. So, weapons of the week are like tools. For like these are subversive tools tools that call into account people in power and excesses of authority. These are abuses of authority and abuses of power. In this case, of course, Rizal was offering a critique of our of colonialism here in the Philippines, and so I think those are two very different things. When you contrast that specific case with Amy Marcos, na in her case, she is speaking from a position of authority, but using satire to dunk on her opponents, right? So I'm always thinking about, are you punching up or punching down? So satire and parody are tools that I embrace, I celebrate as forms of activist communication, a subversive communication, if they're being used by people who are indeed colonized or oppressed. In the case, in that specific context in which Rizal was writing from. Pero kung ikaw naman yung person in power, pero ikaw nagpe-play as a victim, parang kunwari victim ka ng history or victim ka ng media, and then gagamitin mo din ang iyong authority to attack other people, that is an abuse of power, right? So
And
yeah,
historically, the church and the friars felt victimized by Rizal, di ba?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
they were the ones in authority, but they were being attacked by this, this Indio upstart. How dare he, di ba? Parang ganon, no? So, pinurusahan siya.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, nice explanation, John. No, thank you. Now, there's a large assumption that these influence operations were an overriding factor, no, in the electoral outcomes of the presidential and vice presidential races, no. But considering all the other factors, no, how big a factor was it really? And part of this context, of course, is if you contrast a lot of that with what the Leni Robredo campaign was doing. Of course, Leni Robredo, the Robredo campaign also had online operations, but they also had a very big ground operation. No, I mean, they made face-to-face, house-to-house campaigning and explicit strategy. No, they bet big on that. The mobilization of cultural sectors, artists, mural painters, poets, etc. And in a way that was translated to, the biggest rallies in recent history, maybe some of the biggest rallies in Philippine political history. No, I can't, I've covered a lot of campaigns. No, I don't recall that rallies that large. No, I covered several of those rallies during the campaign. No, so in previous campaigns, campaign seasons, no, if you see rallies that large, na hindi naman hakot, no, most of those people hindi naman hakot, with all that energy, no, it seemed to be a fair bet that may momentum, no, yung campaign na yon, yung candidate na yon, in fact enough to win the election. No, we saw that with Duterte in 2016. His campaign rally started picking up only in the latter part of the campaign season, bandang March, April, all the way up to election day. But it didn't happen this time. No, Leni Robredo still lost by a wide margin. No. Now I'm just wondering, what are the lessons of that? Could it be sobrang overwhelming ngayon itong influence, yung impact ng influence operations, that they canceled out the impact of all this effort in the Leni campaign on the ground, setting up these very elaborate stages in all these venues, di ba? Paramihan ng tao sa iba't ibang probinsya. I mean, it was there was that several weeks of the campaign, couple of months of her campaign where the rally just got larger and larger. Akala mo ang lakas ng momentum, no? But she still lost by a wide margin. So, ano ba, what role did the influence operations play in the electoral victory?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, and and I did have some thoughtful conversations with Madame Lenny herself in the past weeks as we prepared to launch the report with her in Harvard. She's also a fellow here, and so I got to hear from her directly. And to me, it's so enlightening to see how Lenny is so talagang halatang halata yung groundedness niya sa community. So she's really, focused sa social work, sa community work. And that's where, her real interests and energies are. Even in those casual conversations, like her most memorable discussions were about being on the ground and how sometimes she would be surprised what, the national campaign would be doing on air kasi babad siya talaga sa ground and mas gusto niya to be on the ground. So I found that really fascinating, and I resonate with that as someone who is also a community engaged researcher and very much immersed in that. So there's various ways of interpreting this, and we discussed this also in the report. Parang there's a version of talking about social media's impact and influence operations impacts as quote-unquote brainwashing of voters, and ayaw namin yun. We actually reject that term and that way of thinking of impacts of a campaign or of social media, because I think it's very disempowering to think of it in that way, na parang people are just blank slates in which political alignments or identities are just being projected onto. Parang people need to resonate with a story. They need to resonate with a narrative. And I think for me, what the Marcoses had was they benefited a lot from the groundwork that Duterte had, readied for them to re-emerge. At the same time, itong influence operations nila, matagal na. In our work, we talk about the longitudinal effects of disinformation na they reap the rewards. Remember, din naman, tumakbo nga naman siya in 2016. So and we had examples from my previous study na meron siyang mga fake trending hashtags from the 2016 election. Pero hindi siya nanalo noon. So hindi naman ganun ang impact ng social media na gumawa ka lang ng quote-unquote a campaign or fake news, mananalo ka na. Natalo siya in 2016. In 2022, the context was readied, was prepared, and it landed on well-prepared ground. And I think and we discussed some of those narratives that definitely resonated with voters. The fact that mainstream media and the trust in mainstream media was really weakened in 2022 definitely mattered a lot. And 'di ba, parang the fact na magno-no show ang isang presidential candidate sa officially sanctioned debates, parang for us
never happened before.
Never happened before. So pero ano yung why was that accepted by citizens? The fact na na-tarnish na yung reputation ng media na parang ay oo nga naman, we don't need to trust a CNN debate or a GMA news debate to be the platform in which our leaders should be coming together. Parang we've lost that investment in mainstream media, and hindi yun nangyari kung if we had not gone through 6 years under Duterte.
Mm. Yeah, kasi nabanggit mo yung longitudinal disinformation. I guess that's a fancy word for saying parang may long-term
Yes.
effort, no? From in fact, even before the spread of social media, 1990s pa lang, 'di ba? Nung umuwi sila sa Pilipinas, nag-umpisa na yung kind of
Yes.
the image rehabilitation, no? So despite all of that, the longitudinal disinformation of the Marcos camp that stretched back nga to the 90s. Marcos Jr., as you pointed out, lost his bid for the vice presidency in 2016, and as late as 2021, kind of mid to late 2021, was not even rating exceedingly well, no, in surveys, until he teamed up with the Duterte machine, no,
Yes.
Sara Duterte. No, aside from the advantages of being an incumbent. Of course, she's not an incumbent, but she's the daughter of the incumbent. She represents. She comes from Mindanao, where the Duterte name is still resonates very strongly, and also the Visayas. So, kung may so-called solid north si Marcos, may southern consolidation naman with the Dutertes. Kasi one analysis nga. Highlighted kind of the odds of beating that, no? That could have even factor
Yes.
could have even dwarfed the influence operations that were
agree.
well funded and extensive, etc. So I guess ang point ko lang dito, John, no, despite all of these new things, no, that you're pointing out, the tipping points in our politics, or I guess the major factors behind electoral outcomes, are still fairly traditional. No, I mean you're a northern, you team up with a popular southerner. I mean even in the US ginagawa yan, di ba? I mean parang binabalanse mo yung ticket. So that's why I asked kung gaano ka laking factor ba yung influence operations, or is it still kasi Lenny also employed a traditional strategy of mobilizing large numbers of warm bodies, but and of course she moved up in the ratings eventually, and she did much better than how she was rating in the late 2021, but still not enough to overtake itong tandem ng North plus South, the Marcos name, the Duterte name, which is still kind of a very traditional way of looking at our politics.
Of course, I agree that traditional on-ground campaigning is so crucial here. The idea that social media are the parang may magic bullet effects siya sa boto. I reject that. At the same time, social media do matter. In the sense that social media shape conversations. They direct our attention as to what publics should be learning about, should be talking about. Ano ba yung mga talk points of the day? Ano ba yung mga issues na kailangang pag-usapan? And ito, this is where influence operations do come in, because there's a tendency for, and we've had examples of this in the report, but also in our previous studies. Yung pag-set ng yung pag-frame ng news, kung yung pag-frame ng isang skandalo or ng isang crisis, dito nangyayari. Yung pag-justify ng specific policy position, whether we should pivot to China or the US, should we trust the US as our ally, what should we think about the effects of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and its impact in the Philippine political system. Ginagamit ito as talk points ng mga online influencers to promote a certain candidate or to attack another candidate. So that's where social media are important. The fact na in a way nag-weaken ang hold ng journalists to set the frame of what's on the agenda social media becomes the battleground in terms of how our stories gonna get framed, what will be the questions that we should be asking our politicians, when we interview them in our programs, etc.
So in other words, despite all of the toxicity, social media is still essential, no? Kasi nga, sabi mo nga, we need to do something, no? And then you had kind of an action plan, no? And one obvious solution in other countries, and in fact, it was raised at the Harvard conference, no, was legislation, no. But people are, people here in the Philippines at least are wary of that, no, of especially, laws made by people who actually benefited from influence operations, no. So if the negative trends that you've pointed out do not change, where are we headed? And then I guess the corollary question there is, so how do we prevent that that apocalypse, no? Kung hindi nga magbago. Para climate change ito, no? Kailangan baguhin yung trajectory ng climate change, otherwise human race will be extinct, no? I guess you can say the same thing about liberal democracy and freedom and all of that, no? If we don't change. So where are we headed, Jonathan?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Howie. So parang the idea of how can we live in parallel public spheres, parang that's not a tenable experience, diba? Na parang kung the idea na we're unfriending each other or that we're unfollowing each other, na may kanya-kanya na lang tayong bubbles, ganun ba yun? How can we do collective problem solving? How can we discuss issues? We need to find ways to at least find a middle and rebuild those centers. Kasi masyado na tayong magkahiwalay. I think that to me is important. Parang at least to create like more spaces in the middle for us to meet and converge and discuss. And obviously as an educator, parang I should begin with education too, right? And ways in which we can empower citizens to be much more discerning, to learn about these issues, how they can protect themselves more. Pero hindi lang ito, how can you detect fake news? Parang feeling ko we've moved on there. Parang most of my educational advocacies have been, how can we prevent college students from being recruited to become influence operators themselves? Parang that's the advocacy of Catch Me If You Can. Na parang, if we retell the stories of how these influence operators are being recruited, sana matauhan yung mga nakikinig para hindi din sila ma-recruit in that same way. Because there are elements of deception in people being recruited to these quote unquote troll farms, diba? And that's what we discussed there. So for us, for me as an academic, I'm doing and I'm much more mindful about trying to make academic research much more accessible to different audiences, to meet them where they are, and kung ano ba talaga yung mga kailangan nila. So I'm keen to partner with journalists, with content creators, with influencers. Myself and my research team are trying to build a website that will do an open access educational course that is all about having a critical approach to disinformation. And may mga practical tools din dito. Hindi lang siya lectures and videos, diba? Pero mga practical tools of, how to talk to a relative, like how to talk to a tita who is a Marcos supporter. Ano yung kailangang ways in which should you have an intermediary to help you open that discussion. So I want like more of those practical toolkits that people can actually use, and I'm hoping to develop some of these educational materials together with other experts. So parang I also admit na as a communication researcher, my experience and my expertise is also limited, and I'm really keen to know and learn from other people who are very good at at being TikTok influencers. Hindi ako marunong mag TikTok, Howie. Ikaw ba, nandun ka? Yeah.
Well, thank you for all that you're doing, John. No, as you previously mentioned, we really need a whole of society approach here. No, and I'm with the so-called legacy media. No, we are always striving to be relevant. No, but as you said, I mean, there's been a tremendous loss of trust in legacy media. A lot of us call ourselves mainstream media, and I don't know what that means anymore. So are we still relevant? The legacy media, the ones the ones who work for large media entities that have been around for a long time. In part of this context, of course, is yung nabanggit mo nga, no? Hindi nagpakita si now President Marcos Jr. at the debates. He didn't show up for the Jessica Soho interview. Nagkaroon ng and he was widely criticized for that. Nagkaroon ng hashtag na Marcos Duwag, no? That went viral, no? But it still didn't affect the surveys, no? So do we still matter? Do we still matter?
You definitely do matter, and that's why they're trying to build an alternative to you. And it is also a broadcast institution, diba? Yeah, I won't name them. Alam ko there's high profile lawsuits and libel cases against other colleagues. Yeah, and so I think that's. I think broadcast media still matter. Journalists and storytellers do matter. I think, liberal institutions like mainstream media, we share the same experiences of being delegitimized and attacked as the academe also. Diba parang academics are also criticized as in various ways. Parang may mga conspiracies na din na parang we are accepting a money from the US or kung ano-anong funder, and therefore that supposedly biases us a certain way, or even undermining national interests, all these conspiracies. And that's also not unique to the Philippines. Parang ganun din yung mga na-experience ng colleagues ko who are from India, including scholars who are Indian academics but based in the US, but obviously criticize their own illiberal government back home. Ganun din yung na-experience nila. So I think what I've learned though is I think it's important for us to try to meet our audiences where they are and try to be much more flexible with the ways we do things. And I think I'm in my at the stage of my career too, in terms of like experimenting different ways of popularizing my research, trying to make it more accessible. So yeah, very practically speaking, Howie, na parang obviously as a teacher and as an academic, parang we are incentivized to publish papers. Diba? Para ma-publish papers with citations, papers addressing our fellow academics too. Yun yung incentive namin. Pero kulang din kami sa outreach, aaminin ko na, sa pag-popularize nitong mga research to reach ordinary people who also need this research, maybe even so much more urgently than our fellow academics talking to our own bubbles, diba? Pero kailangan namin ng tulong from journalists, kailangan namin ng tulong from from influencers and TikTokers na yun talaga yung talent nila, how to make complicated concepts, how to deliver them in punchier and also more relevant language.
Well, okay. So you've talked about academe, we've talked about media, but of course the elephant in the room is the platforms themselves. No,
Mm-hmm.
what's the responsibility? I mean, you've talked to a lot of people, you attend a lot more conferences than most of the people in this world. No, what's the best solution you've heard? No, I mean, this is talk about a conundrum. No, what should they do? What should we do? What should governments do? about the platforms?
Great question. So there's no consensus, including the smartest people I know and work with in Harvard will have a different answer from the smart people of Columbia or Stanford. For some, and I'll just give you like some snippets and an overview, and then bahala na also our listeners to figure out. So parang platform accountability and responsibility is important. Parang we all acknowledge that platforms should be doing more in terms of monitoring, in terms of being more proactive and transparent in their content policy, and also how they support, journalists and academics. So the question of paano ba sila how are they supposed to act better? That is where the challenges and the debates are. Na parang for some people including my colleague Joan Donovan, the idea that platforms are monopolies is a big problem for her. So platforms have become too big; they should be broken up. Right? And so that's one perspective. The question of who is supposed to break them up, like who should be regulating them? Should government be the regulator? It's easy for, Americans and Europeans to be saying these things because their regulators are actually quite responsible. But I would not trust our Filipino legislators to be regulating and, touching any social media data. I would be most skeptical if they try to, do any overreach and try to control platforms. Ano yung examples natin dito? India, Singapore, in terms of other countries who are trying to control social media within their countries and have them report to themselves. And it only benefits the incumbent. So I don't trust any of our legislators with that kind of approach. Again, I think there's a difference here between US and European models of regulation and, what we can actually achieve in the Philippines and the global, what we call the global South.
I don't want to take, keep you too long, John. No, I mean, so much I can ask you. But one final, point lang. Kasi sabi mo nga doon sa report mo, itong this newest report, no, yung parallel public spheres. The 2022 election ended legacy media's gatekeeper role, no? So may conceit kasi kami nasa legacy or mainstream media that we're the gatekeeper for public information. I think that's long been outdated. But sabi mo nga parang ito na natuldukan na talaga nung 2022, no? So what's our role now, no? Kasi sabi ni Lenny Robredo doon sa conference sa Harvard, parang fact checking is not enough, no? Previously, that was we regarded verification as our one essential discipline, no? But now parang it's still not enough. In fact, some people are saying, that's kind of that's driven mostly by funders, and it's not as I'm still a big believer in fact checking, no? Because many years from now, people are still going to look up how we covered certain events, and that would still be part of the record, no? But nevertheless, anong take mo dyan? So hindi na kami gatekeeper. What are we now?
Yeah. Wow. What a great question. What I hope from mainstream media, parang to enable, solicit, and amplify newer voices, to be open to experimentation, to creative storytellers, to find new ways of storytelling and connecting with audiences. And I think parang again, I also I'm an academic. I also acknowledge that you are the experts of your field, and you have a very natural way of connecting with your own listeners and viewers, Howie, and I admire that about you and your work. Eyewitness, I've looked up to it as a college student. It's still ongoing for how many years now?
23 years now.
That's amazing. Yeah. I was part of, I remember a rebrand of Eyewitness from back in the day. And so how to remain relevant for all of those years. I don't think I need to tell you how exactly you should be doing it. But parang a way sometimes though, parang I feel like with journalists and also for us as academics, we are still so caught up in our own routines and ways of doing things. So yeah, like just very practically, and I'll end with this kind of anecdote that I hope and I offer this critique as a way of inviting collaboration and new connection, to but not like only as a critique. For example, the idea na, when I connect with journalists who were confused what to do after the May 2022 elections, they were looking for new ways of connecting with audiences. And then ang sabi ko sa kanila, why don't you, try to connect with also more academics to help, bring in like very important research, very important new findings and discoveries, but help popularize them too. And parang may ganong, for some journalists, may mindset sila, ay, hindi yan papatok sa masa. And to me, I always try to push back against that, na parang may way for us, for us also academics, parang to always kind of think of our readers, our viewers, but not trust them enough as discerning, not trust them enough as, agentic, and, having the ability to also, make good decisions for themselves. And I think we need to be trusting in our audiences more. And I think that means more risk taking rather than doing business as usual, and that applies to all of us.
Okay, thank you. That's wise advice, wise perspective, John. No, just a final sharing lang on my part, since people in so-called mainstream media, people who have been around for a while, have been doing some soul searching then, processing what you've been doing and our own observations. And tama ka, no? We this whole concept of being a gatekeeper, outdated na yan, no? We can't, hindi na pwede yan, no? So what's our role today? Well, one concept is, being more like a shepherd. Not that people are sheep, no, but or maybe guides. We cannot control what goes out into the public sphere anymore, no, but we can help people distinguish between, what's significant, what's insignificant, what's true, what's false. We have the training for it, we have the discipline for it, we have the accountability for it. We don't hide behind aliases. So that's one outcome of this, soul searching by a lot of colleagues. No, nothing as formal as what you're doing, but we have to do a lot of our own self reflection, because sabi mo, there's been a loss of trust, loss of relevance, maybe. So, we have a proud profession and tradition. No, so we need to make sure it still serves society somehow. No, so yun ang isang concept namin, no, na we need to be kind of
Shepherds.
Shepherds or guides towards a better future, like teachers, like people like yourselves, no? Yeah. So we're in the same boat in a way. Yeah.
I get you. If I may also share something else, I'm also and also I guess my own enthusiasm for the podcast format, where we can talk at greater length compared to the news, which needs to be like super punchy and always to the point. I think talking to students and like younger people, parang they are also interested in process. They're also interested in why did you decide to do it this way rather than that way. Parang to kind of like show them how the sausage gets made. Kumbaga, parang that applies to us as researchers, to being more transparent with our values, na parang that's why in this report we anonymize them, because ganito yung dilemma namin, and kaya ganito din yung that's why it looks a certain way. And I think parang sometimes when us academics get also sometimes too defensive, we all sometimes parang fall back on the argument from authority na parang, just trust us, I've done this for years. But I don't think that's enough. Parang we need to be telling our students, our listeners, our own process and our own values for them to also judge us by. Na parang they get to trust us and say na, okay, I resonate with that approach. For those who don't want that approach, then they choose somebody else. And that's okay too.
All right. That's a nice note to end on. Very wise. Thank you, John, for being our information shepherd, giving us
Thank
feedback
you.
and providing guides for understanding what we're all living through and what we need to survive. No, Dr. Jonathan Ong, communications professor and co-author of Parallel Public Spheres, Influence Operations in the 2022 Philippine Elections. Mabuhay ka.
Thank you so much, Howie. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Mabuhay.
Hi, I'm Howie Severino. Check out the Howie Severino Podcast, an original for GMA News and Public Affairs. New episodes will stream every Thursday. Listen for free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and other platforms.